Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get straight to the insight.
That's right.
And today, well, we've got a story that really makes you stop and think about what words like flexible and inclusive actually mean in education today.
Mm-hmm.
We hear this promise, right? Learning that adapts to us. Asynchronous classes, self-paced stuff, all supposedly designed for, the non-traditional student.
Modern learner.
Exactly. But what happens when a university that's built its whole brand on that idea demands the impossible, even when they're looking at official legal disability documentation?
It's a really critical question because this case, this specific story we're looking at, it kind of pulls back the curtain on something much bigger.
Okay.
We're diving into the experience of an autistic student and her parent, who, it's important to note, is a very experienced special education professional herself.
Right.
And they're trying to navigate this university system, one that talks a really good game about support, but, well, the reality seems quite different.
And that's really the core of it for this deep dive, isn't it? Our goal here is to unpack this story, this specific situation, to see how these support systems, maybe even with good intentions somewhere, can say they include, but actually end up excluding people.
Yeah, often just by refusing to understand how people actually function, how they communicate, how they learn.
So we'll look at the specific hurdles they faced, try to figure out maybe why those hurdles exist, and what it all tells us about accessibility in education right now.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so the university in question is Western Governors University, WGU. And if you've seen their marketing, it's all about flexibility, inclusivity.
Mm-hmm. Self-paced courses, asynchronous learning.
Right, pitched as perfect for working adults, disabled students, basically anyone who doesn't fit that traditional Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 college schedule.
And for this student, at first, it actually was pretty good. The system seemed to work for her, for a while anyway.
That's what makes the shift so jarring, I think.
Exactly. The turning point, according to the source material we read, it came when she asked for something simple, something that just wasn't part of WGU's standard operating procedure.
Which one?
She needed to communicate primarily via email. It suited her communication style, her processing needs as an autistic person.
Okay, seems reasonable.
You'd think so. And this wasn't out of the blue. She'd already submitted documentation, her IEP, support history, the works.
But instead of flexibility,
She got what the author calls a maze, a really frustrating one. It sounds like every time they complied, provided something WGU asked for.
the goalposts moved.
Pretty much. New terms, more hoops. The underlying message felt like, if you don't fit our mold exactly, if you don't have the perfect piece of paper from the perfect professional,
We'll just make this difficult until you maybe give up.
or take a break, just go away. And this whole process led into what the author termed the documentation battle, where even a mountain of paperwork just wasn't good enough.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about that documentation.
Yeah.
What exactly did she provide?
Well, it was pretty extensive. There was a whole stack of older records that clearly mentioned her autism diagnosis multiple times.
Okay.
Plus, crucially, her high school exit IEP face sheet from 2019. That document explicitly stated autism as the reason she qualified for special education services.
So official school documentation stating the disability. What else?
There was also a jointly issued summary of performance, the SOP.
Ah, yes, the SOP. For listeners who might not know, that's a big deal in special education.
It really is. It's a federally mandated document under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA.
And its whole purpose is to bridge that gap between high school and whatever comes next.
Right.
Summarizing performance needs.
Exactly. Academic achievement, functional performance, and critically outlining the supports needed for post-secondary life, college, work, whatever's next.
So the source makes the point that ignoring this SOP, or, saying it's less important than a doctor's note.
It's basically rejecting the legal framework. It's undermining the whole point of IDEA's transition requirements.
And this wasn't just a flimsy document, right?
Not at all. It was 8 pages. Detailed. Legally required format. Created with her IEP team and her vocational rehabilitation provider. It specifically laid out how her profile impacts learning and what supports work for her.
The author even mentions this level of planning is more than most autistic students in California get.
She does. Which makes WGU's response even more baffling.
Okay, so she provides all this, the IEP, the SOP, other records.
Yeah.
What was WGU's problem? What were they missing?
Well, here's the snag. The original diagnostic paperwork, like the very first assessment report, had been lost by her healthcare provider, Kaiser.
Oh, during an office move or system change.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
A transition from paper to electronic records. And Kaiser itself said, look, her current records clearly list autism. It's a chronic condition. It doesn't just vanish. That's sufficient for them.
But not for WGU.
Apparently not. They dismissed, as the author puts it, this mountain of scanned paperwork, the official school records, the legally required SOP, basically, because it wasn't a recent report from a doctor.
They wanted fresh testing. Standardized scores.
Exactly. Percentile breakdowns, granular detail on how autism specifically impacts performance on their particular spreadsheet-based tests. They wanted, quote, a precise diagnostic script.
That sounds incredibly specific and maybe difficult to obtain. So what did they actually demand next? The source calls it impossible.
Yeah, it gets almost comical if it weren't so serious. They essentially asked for a fresh diagnosis.
Newer, shinier.
Right. Scored just right with all the percentiles, subtest breakdowns. The author even jokes maybe in 12-point Times New Roman, signed in blue ink.
Dated within a very specific, narrow window.
Yes, like the last 4 to 6 weeks of the term, but only if the disability flares up then. Too early, no good. Too late, also no good.
And ideally from a doctor who personally watched her take one of their exams.
Watched her through the secure browser, noting every microexpression filed under the latest DSM code with a table of contents. It's hyperbole, but it captures the feeling of the demands.
It paints a picture of bureaucratic absurdity. What was the actual reality of getting this?
Impossible. As Kaiser said, they don't just retest for autism unless something's actually changed clinically. Autism doesn't change like that.
And even if they agreed.
The wait list was apparently 1 to 2 years.
So yeah, impossible within WGU's time frame. The author calls this a trap.
She does. Because WGU had 8 pages of functional analysis from professionals who knew the student for years. But it wasn't the right kind of proof on the right paper in the right font.
So if it's not really about getting clarity on our needs, what does the author suggest is the real reason behind these hoops? The why?
The argument presented is that it's less about understanding the student and more about, well, cost control and plausible deniability for the university.
How so?
WGU's system, their default, is built for efficiency. Think multiple choice tests graded instantly by AI, secure browsers that monitor students.
Screen capture, webcams.
Right. Surveillance on the front end, automation on the back. It's designed to scale efficiently.
But what happens when a student's assessment isn't multiple choice? What was this student's experience with her exam?
That's a key point. Her specific test wasn't multiple choice. It was apparently embedded in a web-based version of Excel using some third-party plugin.
Okay.
And she got 0 feedback. No score breakdown, no way to know what she even got wrong. The proctor's watching, yes, but the system just gives a pass-fail or maybe a blank report.
Because the author says no one's actually looking at the substance.
That's the implication. And here's the trap. WGU told her she couldn't get an alternative format unless she could prove her disability affected her performance in that specific testing environment.
But they made that environment completely opaque. She couldn't get the data to prove anything.
Exactly. No access to results means no evidence. No evidence means no accommodation request is valid under their rules. The author is adamant. This isn't just some unfortunate misunderstanding. It's structured this way. It's a purposefully built barrier.
And this whole communication difficulty is amplified because the student, like the author herself, identifies as a Gestalt language processor, a GLP. Can you explain what that means here?
Sure. So Gestalt language processors often don't thrive in situations that demand immediate, on-the-spot verbal processing, like maybe a pressured phone call or filling out complex forms in real time. Rigid test environments can also be really challenging. They might process information more holistically or need time to script or chunk language.
Which explains her initial request to use email.
Precisely. She clearly stated from the beginning that she needed to handle communications via email. It gave her the space she needed to process information and formulate her responses effectively.
And WGU initially agreed to that.
They did. They said yes to email. But the source argues that they then used that agreement to deliver what felt like a quiet no, burying the actual denials or roadblocks and technicalities within those emails.
So it becomes another form of gatekeeping. If you can't communicate in their preferred way, on their timeline,
through their specific forms and channels, then you effectively don't get access. It highlights that inclusivity has to go beyond just physical access. It's about communication styles, processing needs.
Which brings us back to the parent, the author. Her perspective here is unique because she's not just a parent fighting for her child. She is an expert in this field.
Absolutely. Decades of experience as a special education teacher, an IEP case manager, 3 master's degrees, a tenured specialist credential. She knows IDA, the law, inside and out.
So what's it like for someone with that background to be on the receiving end of this?
It's deeply frustrating, as you can imagine. She finds herself having to act as like a backup system for her own daughter. She's translating the university's jargon, what she calls policy doublespeak.
Helping her daughter navigate the demands.
Yes, essentially modeling how to respond when, as she puts it, the language of power is wielded to obscure rather than support. Using technicalities, shifting requirements, bureaucratic runarounds, all the things she usually helps other families fight against.
And that leads her to ask a really sobering question.
It does, she asks. If someone like her, with all her expertise and experience, can't penetrate this fortress, what realistic hope does any other autistic student have at this university, or maybe others operating similarly?
Yeah.
The student isn't asking for anything extraordinary, no special treatment, just for the university to actually listen and acknowledge the needs that are already documented, legally outlined in things like the SOP.
So connecting this specific case to the bigger picture, what's the overall critique here?
The author suggests WGU is playing a kind of game of pretend. They market themselves one-way flexible, supportive for non-traditional learners.
But the reality, when tested,
Shows inflexibility. Whether it's a student getting sick or submitting perfectly valid, legally mandated documents that don't fit WGU's specific template, or requesting email for a documented communication need.
it becomes inclusion in name only.
That's the phrase used. Or equity, so long as it doesn't cost anything. Access, so long as you already fit the mold.
Now, the author also contextualizes this, suggesting it's not happening in a vacuum. She links it to the broader political climate.
She does. And just to be clear, we're relaying her perspective from the source material here. She posits that institutions might feel sort of emboldened right now.
By what specifically?
She points to things like, in her view, a perceived contempt for disabled people, a right-wing backlash against DEI initiatives, and what she sees as a slow erosion of legal protections that were fought for over decades.
And her argument is that schools know enforcement can be weak.
Yes, that enforcement is often under-resourced, complaint processes are incredibly slow, and most students simply don't have the resources, or maybe a parent with deep expertise, to fight back effectively against these kinds of institutional barriers.
This all feeds back into a question that apparently drove the author's earlier academic work, her dissertation, back in 2010.
Right. She was asking even then, why do so many autistic students voluntarily withdraw from college?
And your conclusion?
Because the system isn't built for us to stay. That was her finding then, and this experience seems to tragically reaffirm it for her.
So, underneath the arguments about paperwork and procedures,
The core issue, she argues, is a fundamental refusal to believe autistic students, to trust their stated needs, to value their ways of knowing and learning. The process they encountered felt like it was never really designed to grant access. It was designed, perhaps, to quietly guide students like her daughter toward the exit.
it's a heavy conclusion. And as we wrap up this deep dive, there isn't really a neat resolution, is there?
No, unfortunately not. The student in the story, after doing everything she was supposed to, she followed the rules, submitted the paperwork, advocated for herself. She's ultimately leaving WGU.
Starting over somewhere else.
Yes, planning to enroll at a local state school.
Yeah.
But the damage, the frustration, the lost time and energy, that's already done. The door just stayed shut at WGU.
It feels like a cautionary tale.
Definitely. The author's message seems clear. For any student who is autistic, disabled, or just different in a way that challenges the standard system, be wary. Don't just believe the marketing brochure.
Don't mistake slick branding for genuine care.
Or confuse support services listed on a website with actual functional access. WGU promotes flexibility, but the takeaway here is flexible for them, perhaps, not necessarily for you.
Okay, so let's leave our listeners with something to think about. The source material actually included an example of what the author called a helpful scaffold email.
Ah, right, the template for students transitioning from high school.
Exactly. It was designed for students with special education services to send proactively to universities. It's clear, direct, asks pointed questions about documentation, timelines, who to contact.
Gets ahead of the game, basically.
Right. So here's the thought. What if that kind of proactive, clear communication was the norm coming from universities, instead of something students have to beg for or fight to get clarity on?
Or, looking at it the other way, How can students and advocates maybe use tools like that scaffold email more effectively now to try and navigate or even challenge these institutional barriers before they get trapped in that maze?
It really brings up that question of responsibility, doesn't it? Should universities be obligated to provide that level of clarity up front? Or does the burden remain primarily on the student to figure out the system and demand access?
Something to definitely mull over.